Hello and welcome to session 32 of Talking Asperger's with Andrew. This is a webinar by me, Andrew Marsh, and where I talk about things to do with Asperger's syndrome and the workplace. And so what I'm going to be doing today is talking about a very interesting topic and something that I would like you to pay particular attention to today, and that is the language that you use around people who have Asperger's or autism, because it's very important. Certainly myself, and I know a lot of other people on the spectrum, we tend to take things very literally. We will literally do what you said. If you've asked us to do something, we will have an idea in our head of what that means, and we will go and do that. And so I use an example of, let's suppose you're in a team of 7 or 8 people in a firm of 200 people, and you're working on this project, and your boss says, when it's done, send it to everyone. The boss probably means send it to the 8 people in the team and not the 200 people in the company, because the rest of the company might not be interested in it. Or if some of them are, the boss might forward it to them separately. But the person on the spectrum will think everyone means everyone and will send it to 200 people. In the modern day, that's not necessarily too bad because it can usually be an email. But not so long ago, when I was working as a geologist, we didn't have computers and email. And so we would have to send out, if we did a short run of reports, we would do them in-house. But if we had a big run of reports, we would send them out to another company. We send someone out, say, I'd like 200 copies of that report. Can I pick it up at 4 o'clock? And they go, yep, fine, no problem at all. So you can immediately see that the problem between sending out 8 copies, which you could probably do in-house, and 200 copies, they might be £30, £40 a shot. 8 copies, £240. It's not too bad. You could live with that. But 200 copies at £40, that's £8,000. Suddenly someone's going to look at an invoice and go, whoa, stop. What on earth has happened there? All because the language that you used when you said to the person, send it to everyone, you didn't actually mean send it to everyone. You meant send it to those that have been working on this project. So immediately there's a breakdown in communication because of just what you've said. And the person with autism or Asperger's has taken you literally. And that can happen. Just have seen what Damien's saying. Yes, I've done that very thing and been criticized for sending it to people who should not have received the report. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Someone said, send it to everyone. Person on the spectrum will send it to everyone. I mean, in the consulting engineers that I used to work for, there could be 1,500 people, 2,000 people in the company. You can soon see how send it to everyone can be a very costly mistake. So be very specific in the language that you use. And that I'm going to ask you to do 2 things about that. Firstly, say what you mean. So if you really mean send it to the 8 people in the team, say, when we're done, send this report to the 8 people in the team. That way there's no ambiguity and a misinterpretation or an interpretation can't be made. Send it to the 8 people in the team. Otherwise, you've instantly got the person with autism or Asperger's has then got to make a judgment. But you said everyone, so I sent it to everyone. 1,500 people getting a copy of a report, that's going to be expensive. And it's going to be a lot of time wasted because 1,495 of those people aren't interested in the report. It's just something that sat in their email inbox or has been circulated through the management system. So really important that you say what you mean. The second part that I want you to pay particular attention to is to mean what you say. The two things are very important. You have to say specifically and exactly what you mean. And you have to mean exactly what you say. Because otherwise, someone with Asperger's or autism is going to then try to have to interpret or make a judgment. That's what I think it means. That's what I'm going to do. And they won't question. They won't question it. They won't say, I'm not sure what you meant by that. You said, boom, do that. That's my interpretation. of what you've said. That's the logical conclusion I can come to from what you've said, and that's what I'm going to do. So if you use ambiguous language, if you dither, one of my colleagues in the first company I worked for when I was a geologist, and there was two of them. One was a director and one was senior. Had this amazing knack of being able to say something like this: "Yes, well, no, yes, actually," and you're standing there thinking, "What have you just said? What do you actually mean by what you said? Because you just said yes and no and something else in one sentence. I can't declutter, decode what you've just said. It makes no sense to me." And the director was very good at being able to talk for 20 minutes without saying anything. Well, if you put it this way, and we do this and we do that, and maybe if you think about that, and you get such ambiguous language, and they're going round and round in circles, but not actually going, boom, this is the point I want to make. This is what I want you to do. They're using language that can be misinterpreted, that has to be decoded. Someone's going to make a mistake. And when the mistake is made, it's going to come back on you, because they're going to say, well, I told you. Well, actually, you said some words, but it was gibberish and you didn't make any sense whatsoever. Oh, no. You should have got me to clarify. Last time I did that, you got upset with me because you told me I was being pedantic. And you can see where this argument, this cross purposes, this miscommunication, this breakdown in communication can lead to difficulty, lead to tension, can lead to, if it escalates, can lead to disciplinary issues. When the poor employee who's trying to do what you've asked doesn't actually know what you've asked, can't specifically pin down what it is you've asked them to do, because your language hasn't been clear, specific, and precise. And those are the three words I'd like you to take away from today. Is when you're using language with someone, you should be doing this anyway, because you want all of your employees to understand exactly what you've said. But it's particularly important for people who have autism or Asperger's. Be clear, be specific, be precise. Be clear, be specific, be precise. And that way, your employee knows exactly what you want them to do. Don't say, do the same as we did last time, because all of the circumstances are unlikely to be exactly the same as what we did last time. So do you really mean do what we did last time? Or do you mean take the similar approach to what we did last time, but bear in mind this, and this are different? And that's where you need to be clear. Rather than saying do what we did last time, you want to say, this is similar to what we've done last time, but I want you to particularly address these 3 points, which are different. Bang, bang, and bang. Be very clear, be very specific. Just going to read what Damien said here in the chat. I tend to question most instructions. I've been in meetings where the opposite instructions are given, making it impossible to know what was concluded. Completely agree with that. I have been called a pain for asking for clarification, so I'm sure on the way forward when language has not been clear. Yeah, I completely agree. It's such an easy thing to get right, but it's such a common thing to get wrong. That might sound contradictory. Be clear, specific, and precise. I know I'm going to keep coming back to those 3 words today. Don't be ambiguous. Boom. If you really don't know what you want them to do, have a conversation with them and say, I'm not sure how we should approach this. I've got these few ideas in my head. Get feedback and input from that other person, from your employee, and then sit down and have a conversation. Make notes of what we have agreed we're going to do this. That's great. Thank you. We have nailed our colors to the wall. We're going to do this. We're then going to do that. And then we're going to do the 3rd point. So that gets away from which of the 2 or 3 options or 5 or 6 options that you were considering, but you weren't really sure about. Nail it down and say, yes, we want to do this, this, and this. And if it turns out, having done that, something else crops up, a different situation, a different conclusion, a different scenario, have a conversation around that as well. Saying, yep, I've done that, but actually it's leading to a different conclusion from what we would normally get in a similar circumstances. And have that conversation, have that conversation with the employee, have that conversation with your boss and say, I'm getting a different vibe from this one. It's not turning out the same as I expected. Can we talk about it? And then you get the opportunity to say, this is what I found. This is what I've discovered. These are the conclusions that I'm drawing from that data, that analysis, that technical analysis or the procedure, and then have a conversation about it, so that when you get to the end and you are at the point where you're delivering the report to your line manager, your boss, your supervisor, before it goes through its QA procedure and it's reviewing and it's checking, your boss doesn't get a nasty surprise, because they've got the experience. They should know roughly what you're going to be saying is going to come out of this project. So don't give them a nasty surprise where they go, whoa, ooh, I didn't get that. That's not what I was expecting. When you finally deliver your report to your boss, they should have expected what you come up with, because you've had the dialogue with them throughout the course of the project. But going back to my 7 steps program, checking in, step number 3, really important that you check in and you have regular checkpoints. Maybe it's a weekly one, maybe it's a fortnightly or monthly, depending on the size and the scope of the project. But always have check-in points so that you know that you're going down the right road. Your employer knows that you're tackling this in the right way. And they then have the confidence. It gives 2 people confidence. It gives you the confidence to know that you're addressing this in the right way. And it gives your boss the confidence to know that you're heading down the right avenue with what they've asked you to do. So those two confidences is a win-win, because it builds rapport, it builds understanding, and it builds the interpersonal communication between you and your boss that some of us on the spectrum struggle with. We're not very good at picking up social cues and things like that. And so it's good to know that you're getting the right signals from your boss when you're having your weekly or your fortnightly feedback. That's building up a rapport, because what you are doing in a very gentle, subtle way is you're training those around you, your colleagues and your boss, how to best communicate with you, which might be different from the person sitting next to you, or the different from the other people in the project. But you are helping your colleagues, your boss, your fellow members of the team in how to communicate with you so that you can do your best work, and they can understand why you're doing it in that way and how it develops. So it's really important that this ongoing communication that you have, your checking in, your use of good, clear, specific, and accurate language helps everyone on the team and you and your boss develop better and further, so that the next project you come along, you've got some more systems in place, you've got more communication understanding in place, so that it goes better. Just having a quick look at what Damien said here. I think it's easy to give instructions where important details are left out, making it difficult to follow. So both clarity and good preparation of instructions are important. Yeah, I completely agree. It's like going into a meeting. You shouldn't go into a meeting not knowing what your agenda is. So when you're giving instructions to someone, you should be making sure that those instructions are in writing, they're clear, and you sit down with that person. Have a cup of tea with them, have a cup of coffee, get away from the hullabaloo of the office environment and say, I've got this piece of work for you, I'd like to go through it with you, and I've got a checklist. We can go through it point by point, and I'll give you the opportunity to ask questions as we go. That's much better than sometimes I have had. I've got into work in the morning and there's something on my desk that says, Andrew, do something or other with this report, give me a specific instruction. We've had no communication. I've been given the report. I've been told to do something with it. Well, it's not very clear instructions from your boss, so first thing I would do, if the boss is not around, because he tended to come in later, I was an early bird, is I would actually start to read the report, so that I had an understanding of what the report contained, so that when he came in, I'd say, can I talk to you about what you've asked me to do? I'm not quite clear about something. And then you could have that conversation, rather than going off in what you think that instruction meant when it wasn't clear. And having that two-way dialogue is much better than having 5 sheets of paper to try and decipher. It's important to have it in writing, of course, but have the conversation. Then when you've had the conversation, confirm back what you're going to do. Make a note in your notebook. Bang, bang, bang. We're going to do these 3 things. And then you're off. You're running. You know what you're going to do. And so does your boss. It's a much better way of dealing with things. So instructions, and it's very important that all instructions are instructions, and it's very important. Get them in writing if you can. All instructions. If you don't get them given to you in writing, confirm back to your boss in a memo or an email. You've asked me to do this to your boss. I understand it to be X, Y, and Z, and those you've asked me to do this. I'm going to do. So I understand it to be X, Y, and Z. There's a tacit implication that they've agreed with you that what you've said that you are going to do is what he understands that he wants you to do. If you get an email back within half an hour, you need to have a conversation rather than firing emails backwards and forwards to each other. So it's really important that, coming back to what I said earlier, you say what you mean and you mean what you say. Because the ultimate aim of a business is to deliver something to someone. If you're a ball bearing manufacturer, you'll have raw materials, you'll have a process, and you deliver ball bearings in boxes or crates to your supplier, to your clients. If you're in the service industry, you're a consultant or an architect or a designer, you've got a certain amount of input information. You may do a certain amount of factual investigation. You may have a certain amount of interpretation, and then you have professional opinion in the report. You're still going through a series of steps to deliver something. And that delivery, that deliverable item is what you get paid on. You send your invoice for 10,000 ball bearings. When you've delivered it to your client, you send an invoice, they pay it within 28 days. So you send your report to your client when you finish the project, you send them an invoice and you should get paid within 28 days. And that's how things work. So the deliverable item has to be clear in what its intent was. It has to go through the process, has to highlight challenges and problems that you overcame or difficulties that you had to deal with, what you did to overcome them, what it means to the project, and what your conclusions and recommendations are, so that the client knows they've got this report, this is what we've done, that's what we've come up with. Because in consulting engineering, the next phase from that report is to say, okay, go and build it. Now that might mean they recommission you to put out tender documents, get a list of contractors, put them together and issue tender documents to the contractor. But your issue of a report isn't the end of a project usually. It's usually the next step in the cog. And then you may have planning to get approval for. There may be third-party checking in certain aspects of work I was involved in geotechnical work. There was a lot of third-party checking for governmental projects. It was a mandatory third-party checking procedure. So you had to allow in your program for issuing the report and all the factual information to another consultant so that they could check your work. So you've got all of that communication to be done, and there were procedures. That was great. The geotechnical certification procedure, as it was then, had procedures. It had a manual, big, thick manual of guidance of how you went about checking the main designer's information. So all of these things that have a process, have a manual, have a system, is great because it's written down. At this step, you've got to do these points. There it is, written down in black and white. Not ambiguous, very clear. So that's good. To have a series of procedures in place as to what to do is the best way to work, because then everyone knows they've got the manual, they've got the guidance, it's in writing, they know what they're supposed to be doing. So these things are really important to develop the project on, because someone else, once you've finished with your aspect of it, may take it on and do something else with it, like build the motorway. I've worked on some projects where the end result is a construction project that's over £100 million for a contractor's price. So you've got to get it right. If you get it wrong and you've got a £100 million project on the go, you make a mistake that costs 7%. That's a £7 million overrun. Someone's going to be starting asking questions. So you need to be very clear in what you do, so that the next person, the next engineer, the next person down the line knows exactly what that report means and what they can then do with it, can develop it further down the food chain until you get to the end result. So really important that you're clear, specific and precise. That's all I wanted to talk about today. But I was wondering if anyone had any other comments that they wanted to make. I can see Damien typing away. We have a problem with Damien's audio at the moment, so we're doing it through the chat. I'm just going to read what he said. I have a series of procedures on aspects such as microbiology and control of contaminants in the business. It has to be very clear, so we have to show good practice and potentially avoid issues with customers. Absolutely right. You know, when you're dealing with microbiology and contaminants, you've got to get the information right. You've got to be experienced enough to know what the results mean. Whether there's a rogue in there that is a rogue. Is it a rogue because someone's made a mistake testing, or is it a rogue because there's something else that's flagged up that needs to be looked at in more detail? So we did it with we do it with borehole records. We quite often would get borehole records from a borehole that was drilled, and you'd see something and you think that doesn't look right, and so you would then say, is that natural occurrence, or has someone made a mistake in doing the testing or drilling the borehole? That's only stuff that you can gather from experience, but it's really important that when you get data in and you get information in that's coming in, or you've done an experiment and there's test results, that you understand what the results mean. And if something doesn't make sense, it should be a flag. Say, does this make sense because we've made a mistake testing, or does it not make sense because there's actually something else with the data that is really important that we need to consider? Yep, Damien just mentioning here, yes, borehole analysis is one of those areas where you need to control and needs a methodical approach. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And when we drill boreholes for ground investigation, there's a British standard for how to do it, and there's a British standard for how to report it, and there are, so all of those procedures and controls are in place. But that doesn't always mean that sometimes something slips through the net and is a spurious result. And you think, is that a rogue because something has happened? Someone's made a mistake? Is it someone mistyped it when typing up the report? Or is it a rogue because there's something else at play that needs to be considered and need to be looked at in more detail? That's where your experience comes in when dealing with those sorts of things. So it's really important that when you have got information coming from third parties, or you've done testing and analysis, just like when I was a geologist, we would do settlement calculations, or we would do slope stability analysis. You've got to know, you've got to have an idea before you start what sort of answer you're going to get. If I was to do a slope stability analysis on a slope that I thought was probably going to be okay, if I came back with a factor of safety of 1, I knew something wasn't right, because we should be getting a factor of safety of above 1.4. So if I did the analysis and get a factor of safety of 1, something is right. Maybe the input parameters are wrong. Maybe I've made a mistake in calculations. So you would then go and interrogate what you have done to find out why you didn't get a result that you expected, or you got a result you didn't expect, rather. So it's really important that not only do you take on board the information that you get from testing and experiments and analysis, that you do a sensitivity check on the information that you get as well, so that you understand what it means. And maybe you need to speak to someone. Oh, I've got this couple of these results don't seem right to me. Can we have a chat about it? Can you have a look at it? Because something's not quite right. And it's really important when you're looking at information like that, that you trust your gut reaction when you say something doesn't feel right, because further down the line, that could become a major problem. So if you haven't identified it and flagged it up as an issue, somewhere down the line, something could become quite a serious issue further down the line and have implications for the next phase, be it the cost, be it time or overrun, or the technical success of something that you're doing. So it's really important to analyze what you're doing and to have a sensitivity check on what you're doing. So this is where it's really important that you have clear, specific and precise information. Oh, it's a great topic. I love talking about being specific, because there are so many opportunities to get things wrong, but there's usually only 1 or 2 opportunities to get things right. And believe me, I've been on the end of some, later on in my career, I was the person reviewing other people's reports. So I would not know anything about the project. I would have someone's report and I'd be reading through it and I'd think, hang on, that conclusion doesn't bear out the analysis or the facts. Something doesn't tie up there. And it's really important that you get the opportunity to say, I'm not quite sure where you've got to this conclusion, or that analysis doesn't sound right. So it's really important to sensitivity check what you're getting, and allow time in your programs for that checking procedure to be thorough. I know in consulting engineers, Friday afternoons were usually when reports had to go out. There was absolutely no point whatsoever giving my boss the report at 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, saying, this has got to go out tonight at 5 in the post. That is not giving your boss any chance whatsoever to do a proper review of that report and sign it off. You know, if you're going to be issuing things at 5 o'clock on a Friday in the post, then you need to have it to your boss by lunchtime on Wednesday, depending on the size and the nature and the scope of it, so that they can have a day or two, because it's quite likely that your boss has got 10 or 20 or 30 projects on the go, and they can't suddenly drop everything that they're doing to read one report from one person. So they have to program it in. You have to allow for them to have their time. And if they flag anything up, you've got to have the conversation. He said, I'm not quite sure I agree with this point. So you have the conversation. And then if the report needs changed, you need to change it. Go back, make the changes, do another revision, and then say all your conclusions are about that point to your boss, so that they can be given the opportunity to do it right. Because ultimately, they have to sign it off. They're putting their reputation on the line for their business. And in consulting engineering, that would be our professional indemnity insurance, as well as our reputation. So you have to allow the time for that. So it's really important that what you put out sets out what you intended to do, what you found, what your analysis was, what your conclusions and recommendations are. And it might well be that thing, that anomaly that you had, you can't define. It's just an anomaly in some of the data. Flag it up and say, this is an anomaly in the data. It might mean A, B, or C, but it needs to be taken into account when moving the project forward. And that might mean that you have to have a separate discussion with the people further down the line as to what it means and how they approach their aspect of the project. So don't ignore those little gut reactions and those little anomalies that appear. Don't ignore them. Investigate them, find out what's going on with them. And that was today, talking about communication with people on Asperger, who have Asperger's and autism. And it's really important as an employer to understand that everyone works differently. And if you have neurodivergent people in your teams, you're going to need to have to find the right way to communicate with them so that they can do what you want them to do. Because with very few exceptions, no one deliberately sets out to fail at something. They want to do it good so that they feel fulfilled and valued, and the company can move the project forward, and they get paid their invoices at the end of it, and the client is happy with the end result. So if things do go wrong, it's usually because there's a breakdown in communication. So back to my 3 words again: be clear, be specific, be precise, say what you mean, and mean what you say. And if you do that for all of your employees, not just those who have Asperger's or autism, you will find that your operation runs smoother, because everyone then understands how to communicate with each other in the teams. And that leads to more harmonious working. It means mutual respect in your teams, and everyone gets along better. And you can understand where people are coming from when they flag something up and say, I'm not quite sure about this point. Can we sit down and have a chat about it? Because then you know that that's something that should be taken on board and should be looked into and investigated further, rather than just dismissing it. Really important. So that's all I wanted to cover on today's session. If you are an employer and you would like to know more about how to manage Asperger's syndrome and people with autism at work, what sort of communication channels you need to implement, then I'd I'd welcome the opportunity to have a free consultation with you. But other than that, that is all for today. So I'm going to close the recording and look forward to it till next week.